So thank you everybody for joining us, everybody in the Zoom call and everybody watching live on Facebook or recorded on Facebook or on YouTube for this discussion between Dr. Bob Stubblefield and Dr. Andrew Bernstein on the question of the US presidential elections. Who should objectivists vote against? Now, let me say at the outset, this is, politics is always the topic that uh, it's most difficult to discuss in a civilized manner. Now, both our speakers I'm not worried about, but I will ask the audience, please feel free to debate in the chat, but keep it civil. Remember, if you look at what I think many of our audience here are Americans, but the Brits and anybody else will also understand uh, both candidates are very, very bad. So I always say, when I hear people say, I don't understand objectivists who can vote for this guy or that guy, let me explain it to you. You focus enough on one guy, you want to vote for the other. That's that part of the argument. And for everything else, we have Bob and Andy, and we will go to Bob first. Bob.
Yeah, I wanted to speak first because I'm sure that I will agree to many things that Andy would say, so let me get them out of the way beforehand. First off, the basic question that we're trying to answer is who's going to buy us the most time or who's going to cost us the least time before, as long as we can spread objectivism, we've still got time. So who is most likely to get us to the point where we cannot spread objectivism the fastest? Second point of agreement. Well, we agree on individual rights. We agree that that the government restricted to the proper role of protecting individual rights is best. And so part of the what we're looking for is which one will do that. If we look at the current context, currently life is actually pretty good, give or take a pandemic or two, and give or take a socialist program or two, and give or take an overspending budget or two. But if you look at Pinker's data in Enlightenment Now or some of the other things, life is generally pretty good. Now, one of the things that has allowed us to have life continue to be good in spite of the creeping socialism that we all see is innovation. Innovation has been able to outpace, at least slightly, our regulatory crowd. So as long as that keeps happening, maybe we can still have a fairly good life. Politically, of course, individual rights have been under attack. We've been creeping towards socialism more and more. We've got the nanny state, more and more regulations, ever increasing government spending. Politically, collectivism is winning over individualism, and culturally the same. Culturally, the US populace is becoming more tribalistic, more anti-conceptual, more anti-value. Here, emotion is winning over reason. Now we get into some particulars in politics. All politicians are pragmatists. They're not principled. And at least, to some extent, they all love to get paid for the pull that they have. If we look at the Democrats in particular, they've been consistently moving and acceleratingly so towards more and more stages. You look at the extreme party and they're out and out socialists. Well, examples, of course, are their appeals for universal health care, universal pay for education from K through college, and of course the Green New Deal. So they've been ratcheting towards more and more statism. We should note that there have been some exceptions to the ratchet. The ratchet has slipped once in a while a little bit. Under Clinton, we actually got somewhat of a relief from the welfare programs. Under Carter, we actually got a lot of regulatory relief, more than under other presidents. Not enough, clearly. If you look at what the Democratic theme is for the race right now, it's anti-Trump. And the hyper crowd argues that, of course, Trump is going to immediately become a dictator. If you listen to Bill Maher, he's predicting that if the election is close, that Trump will seize power, continue power, will not be removed. The Republicans are Me Too. They're not exactly opposing statism. They're just dragging their heels somewhat. Lately, they've deserted pro-immigration. They've deserted fiscal conservatism, and they're preaching nationalism. What's the platform for the Republicans? Does anybody know? The platform is, we don't have a platform. In essence, it's a blank check. The Republican theme is fear. If you don't elect Trump, we're going to get riots in the street, which of course we don't have right now. Now the hyper arguments against Biden are that, well, I've seen at least one posting on Harry's list, worrying about the Chinese taking over. Biden, he's blah. He's creepy. Be careful if you're female, he'll sniff your hair. Trump, he's authoritarian. He's despicable. There's some 23 claims of sexual harassment against him. If you read a current release Atlantic magazine article, they'll say you don't want to be alone in a room with him if you are a semi-attractive female. Okay, so I'm assuming, Andy, that we're pretty much in agreement on all of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, Bob, we're in agreement on that.
Okay, all right. Now, points of contention. How crazy is Biden? And how controllable is Biden by the crazies? I would argue that Biden is not as crazy. Somebody on the meeting up said Biden is a socialist, vote against him. I do not believe that Biden is a socialist. There are socialists who may sway him. So a point of contention would be, how much sway will they have? With respect to Trump, how good has Trump been in cutting taxes, in fighting the universal health care, in cutting regulations, in standing up to dictators, in promoting free trade, in controlling spending, in acting to minimize negative effects of the pandemic? Now, I'm pretty negative for Trump on all of those. I don't know that possibly Andy has some positive comments about Trump on some of those things. But before, in fact, rather than getting into the details, the bits of those points of contention, I would like to suggest that everybody put their thinking cap on and think a little bit about this. If you just go by emotion, there's no way I'm going to ever vote for Trump. So, but let's don't go by emotion. Let's think about reason. So here are some things I would like you to think about. What's the end game? It'll probably be quite a few years from now, at least I hope. But what's the form in which we lose our last chance of spreading objectivism? Is it we're going to gradually strangle ourselves, a la the ratcheting of socialism? Or is there going to be a power grab by some authoritarian? Here you might want to look at history. You know, think of the takeovers of Venezuela, Cuba, Nazi Germany, Lenin and the communists. Were they gradually strangled by socialist programs? Or was there something else that happened, an authoritarian seizing power? If you want to imagine the United States getting gradually strangled to such an extent that we lose the power of free speech, think about Sweden. Sweden was in fact strangling itself with social welfare programs, and yet they turned around. They still had social welfare programs, but they freed the economy immensely. They're freer in many respects than the United States is in business today. Try starting a small business in the United States. So think about that end game. And now let's look at the candidates in particular. Which candidate moves us closer to an end state? I claim the end state is authoritarianism, and that I claim that our friend Donald is the one who will get us there fastest. If voters don't repudiate his style, which is lies, his arbitrary raising of conspiracy theories, his playing patty cake with dictators, his belief that he can do whatever he wants and get away with it. I mean, explicitly he said he could kill somebody on Broadway or whatever avenue he spoke of and he'd get away with it. He overblows the praise when he hires somebody and does the opposite, of course, when that person leaves. Nobody bad has ever been hired by him, and nobody good has ever been fired by him. And of course, he's got this deep state attack, but not merely on genuine dangers of the deep state, but on the very existence of the deep state itself, that is, of current incumbents in any position. So if we don't do that, if we don't repudiate Trump, I think we've ratcheted towards statism, not towards statism, but towards a dictatorship. Okay, that's my case.
Before we go to Andy's case, let me remind people or people who are new, if you have a question or a comment, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. We have one raised hand, and unlike most Mondays, we have only 1 hour, which means we have less than 45 minutes. So I usually say we're guaranteed to get to your question. Now I would say if you don't raise your hand in the next few minutes, we're guaranteed probably not to get to your question. So yeah, questions or comments, please raise your hand now, and when we get to you, please keep it short. Now, Andy is in what I believe is an electric car, right? And he will give his case against.
In an electric car, that's right, Razi. It's a Honda. So I gotta teach in a little while, and I agree with most of what Bob said. You know, certainly we're in complete agreement on objectivist philosophy. I agree with him about some of the dangers of Trump, although I think Trump has done some positives too, much more than the Democrats would do. But mostly my case is just is against the Democrats. We're talking about who's the more egregious evil. I think it's the Democrats, and I don't think it's close. I think the Democrats are vastly more evil by many orders of magnitude. Now, the evidence to support that is, you know, for one, whose base is rioting out in the city streets and has been doing it for months? Well, they're leftists, and the Democrats are the party of the left. Worse than that, Democratic mayors, city councils, and governors have just let it go on. They shouldn't let it go on for an evening. They should suppress riots, never mind for 3 months. It's a disgrace, and it's terrifying as to what it means for the future. On top of that, they want to defund the police. And defund the police, I mean, that's criminals live. This is what the Democrats, this is what the left wants to do. This is what, and the Democrats are the party of the left. I think we should defund the Democratic Party, and I think, you know, there's all kinds of people we should defund. I think we should defund the public school system. I think we should defund, you know, a lot of the professors in the humanities departments of our universities. I think we should defund, and I think we should cancel Marx and Engels. You know, there's a lot of cancel culture, and defunding I think would be good, but not the police. I think we need to fund the police even more, especially in the high crime rate areas. Now, on this issue alone, homicide rate, not surprisingly, is going up significantly in a number of Democrat-controlled cities. It's been high for a long time, and it's rising. Given their policies, that's not a surprise. I think it's literally a life and death issue to keep these creatures out of power. I think on this issue alone, I think it's enough to vote straight Republican. I think the Democrats aren't even Marxists anymore. I think they become they're post-Marxist nihilists is what they are today. It's not even about establishing a socialist state anymore. It's about looting, burning, rioting, and burn it down. I can't repeat the language because there's a family show, but burn this bleep down is their attitude. They are the leftist base, the Democrat base will dance gleefully while they burn down American cities. I think the barbarians are not at the gates anymore, guys. The barbarians are inside the city and they're burning it down. And if there's any chance to establish civilized society and law and order, it's going to come from the Republicans. And I agree with Bob. I think Trump is an egregious liar. There's all kinds of bad things about Trump. But I'm going to vote straight Republican or vote straight anti-Democrat. I would do it just on this issue alone. If there's any chance to restore civilized behavior and suppress rioting in the streets, if there's any chance at all, it's not going to come from the Democrats. It's going to come from the Republicans. And of course, when Trump wins re-election in November, as I think he will, we know what the left is going to do. The left will do the only thing it does well. It will riot. So this issue alone, I think the Democrats need to be slapped hard across their drooling faces by the voters. But then there's also the AGW hypothesis, anthropogenic global warming and the Green New Deal. Now, this is another vicious piece of insanity from the Democrats. First of all, climate change is overwhelmingly natural, only trivially man-made. And second of all, warming is beneficial to life on Earth. It's the cold periods that are harmful to life on Earth. And so the Democrats want to severely curtail the use of fossil fuels, which are going to drastically harm the economy. And there's no possible offsetting gain because one, it won't have any impact on climate change, and two, the warming that they seek to curtail is a benefit. It's all insane. I mean, it's insanity piled upon insanity. You couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, it's too bad Ayn Rand wasn't alive today, so she could include this in Atlas Shrugged. On this issue, again, alone, I think it's enough to vote against the Democrats and to vote Republican. But then I'm going to make one more issue because I'm not going to disagree too much with Bob about Trump and the Republicans, but, the case I'm making here is that the Democrats are worse. Indeed, they're far worse. One more example on foreign policy. Trump supports Israel, who's our only ally in the Middle East. He moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. It was a clear statement of support for Israel. He helped broker the peace treaty between Israel and the Emirates. He oversaw the strike that killed the leader of ISIS. And I think most critically, the strike that killed a leading Iranian jihadist, which the Democrats opposed. They all screamed bloody murder when Trump took out that blood-drenched Iranian jihadist this past winter. Can anybody trust the Democrats to defend the country from our enemies? I agree with Bob about, his kissing up to the lunatic in North Korea, and other dictators, although I don't think Trump generally is as bad on that as Obama. But if anybody is going to defend the country, let's put it this way. Maybe we have a 1 in 10 chance that the Republic, if I could cite arbitrary numbers, maybe we have a 1 in 10 chance that the Republicans will defend the country against jihadists and other bad guys. But I think we have like a 0 chance that the Democrats will do it. The Democratic Party of men who sincerely loved America and would defend America, that Democratic Party is dead. Now, the Republicans, I think, Trump's a nationalist, but there's certain good in that too. There's bad. There's certain good in that. I think he doesn't hate America anyway. Maybe he loves it. Maybe he doesn't. He doesn't hate America. He's not going to contribute to its destruction. He might even oppose our enemies. But the Democrats, they're part of the destroy America crowd. The Democratic Party of Harry Truman, John Kennedy, Scoop Jackson, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, people like that who I may have agreed or disagreed with on this issue or another, they love the United States. They're willing to defend the United States. People don't remember John Kennedy was as much, for all his flaws, was as much a Cold Warrior as Ronald Reagan, brought us to the brink of nuclear war with the Soviets in 1962 to keep offensive missiles out of Cuba. If these guys were alive today, Kennedy, Truman, Scoop Jackson, Moynihan, they'd have to be Republicans. So there's no place for them in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party hates America. They'll tear it down at home, and they won't defend it abroad. The Democrats have to be slapped hard across their drooling faces by the American voters, even when Trump is the Republican candidate. I mean, I could say more on that, but you get that's the main argument. The Democrats are post-Marxist nihilists. They want destruction for its own sake. The Republicans are simple-minded nationalists. There's whole orders of magnitude difference in the degrees of evil, and the Democrats are far worse. So that's my case put simply.
So let's go straight to the Q&A and try to get through as many questions as possible. I will once again ask people, when you ask a question, please try to keep it to 30 seconds or you know, if you have to go a bit longer, please less than a minute, because we really don't have that much time. Joseph.
My comment is very brief. I'd like to pose that instead of asking how we can not lose, we need to ask how are we going to win, because it's a very different mindset. That's my comment.
Andy, you want to start?
How we're going to win? You mean objectivism, Joseph?
Yep. That's right. What does it take for objectivism and individual rights to basically win the day, right?
Yeah, I got it. And I agree with what Bob said before. We're looking politically here for the candidates and the parties who give us the most time, who buy us the most time, who don't undermine freedom of speech and freedom of intellectual expression as egregiously as the other party. And here I think, again, the party to fear is the Democrats. They're the ones who I think they're the ones with that. I'm getting ready to go teach a college class. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm sitting in a college campus parking lot. I may get fired, you know, for arguing to vote Republican on this. I think the Democrats are the worst danger regarding freedom of intellectual expression. They control the humanities programs of our universities. They control the teachers union and the public school system. They very much suppress. They want to teach students that the United States is a racist nation, an evil nation, and I want to teach the 1619 Project, that the United States was founded to further racism and slavery. They'll suppress freedom of speech from anybody who supports capitalism or individual rights. The key issue here is to protect the First Amendment, is to protect freedom of speech and freedom of intellectual expression. I agree with Bob, that's the key issue here, that who buys us the most time, to me, means who buys us the most defense of freedom of speech. And I think, does Trump have tendencies towards being a dictator? Well, I don't know if I'd go that far. He's an egregious liar. He may be even worse than politicians generally. He's not a man of strong character. He's not somebody that I want to be buddies with. But I don't think he represents, and his ilk represents, the threat to the First Amendment, the threat to freedom of intellectual expression that the leftist, politically correct Democrats do. So we need to buy time. And then I think the Republicans will give us more time than the Democrats, and then double down on teaching objectivism, promoting objectivism, recommending to everybody we know to read Ayn Rand, giving copies of the Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged to people, like, as a gift, doing podcasts, just talking to any, and whether it's going online and communicating to people on social media or talking to colleagues, neighbors, friends, families. We have to double down on Ayn Rand. People need to read Ayn Rand. Now, we can't be fanatics because that'll just turn people off. But we need to, gently but firmly suggest that you should read Ayn Rand, and try and use the crisis. Look how bad Trump is. Look how bad the Democrats are. You see the crisis? read Atlas Shrugged. If there's one book, this is what I tell people, is if there's one book that is the key to the most important book in anybody's education, it's Atlas Shrugged. So try and convince people to read Atlas Shrugged. It's more difficult today because the American educational system has turned out a number of semi-illiterates. To read an Atlas Shrugged is agonizing. But buy them the audio book, you know. But we need to defend freedom of speech. That's the key, so we can keep promoting objectivism. And I think the Republicans are much less bad on this than the Democrats. So that's my answer.
Bob?
We should be careful about assuming collectivist ideas for Democrats and Republicans. For example, will there be fewer Democratic mayors if Trump is elected? I don't know. I sort of doubt it. I think that's an irrelevant issue. So the fact that there are riots in the street in cities controlled by Democrats right now is hideous. And I think that there will be people who learn from that and go against those particular Democrats. But I don't think that's really an issue with respect to this election. What I'd like to call your attention to is, if you think of Biden as the leader of the Democrats, you know, what is he going to do? What will people follow him? What path will people follow if he's the leader? Contrast that with what the Republicans have done with Trump as a leader. Is there anything that Trump has proposed that is stupid? For example, more money, the way he handled the pandemic. The worst thing is probably his tariff, interference with free trade. What have the Republicans done with respect to opposing? That's the thing that I see. I see that Trump, when he is in power, is going to be followed by people who will not oppose his stupid ideas. Whereas if Biden were in power, he's not the one who's going to be proposing stupid ideas. It will be a fight. Now there's an issue that came up that I saw in the chat, that somebody said there's no way that the United States will ever become authoritarian. We're not going to be subject to a coup. We've got a process. We've got elections. We've got separation of power. Balance of power, separation of functions. Now, who is in fact attacking that the most? Who is leading us towards a possibility that that someday down the road, an authoritarian will have less process to fight than they do now? There's no way Trump can seize power. There's too much in the way of that. But if we ratchet towards that, that is what scares me.
Our next question is from Adam.
My question is mainly for Andy, because from where I am, our main tool for spreading objectivism to the world is the technology innovation industry, especially the platforms that Trump would censor. Right now, I am free to set up my own social media site, my own blog site, but what is going on is that Trump has explicitly advocated censorship of social media, so that I will no longer have the option of setting up my own social media place on the web, like Parler, for example, because everything will be regulated by Trump's proposed so-called anti-censorship, and in fact, censorship of the internet. And this is leading straight to the establishment of a great firewall of America, because China already has one. And, you know, Trump says he's against China, but everything he's done is imitation of China. And I would very much like Andy to comment on that.
Yeah, definitely, Adam. But before I get to your main point, I just want to disagree with one thing, and that is the main way to spread objectivism is for people to read Atlas Shrugged. We could use social media and should, to introduce people to Ayn Rand's ideas and so forth. But if somebody's going to understand objectivism and support, they have to read Ayn Rand's novels. That's what scares me, is that the educational system has so dumbed down the education that a lot of the kids struggle with the mechanics of reading, period. Reading Atlas Shrugged is agony, but they have to read Atlas Shrugged, and we could use social media to promote Atlas Shrugged. But yeah, I get your point about the tech industry. Trump is very bad on this, but across the political spectrum, people want to censor the internet, in one form or another. The leftists, of course. I mean, you're right about Trump, and that's a real negative. I do think there's more hope to convince the Republicans that freedom of speech is sacred and the internet's private property. And if Mark Zuckerberg wants to, now the censor is not the right word, but if he wants to suppress conservative or pro-capitalist views or individual rights views on Facebook, it's his property, and consequently it's his moral and legal right to do so, and that we should fight Mark Zuckerberg's suppression of dissenting ideas with better ideas and try and convince Mark Zuckerberg to have a more rational policy regarding his property. And this is not the place for government intervention, because government intervention here is censorship. So I agree with you that Trump is dangerous on this, but no more so than the Democrats. I think the Democrats are just as bad, even worse, because they overtly believe in censoring freedom of speech. They do it on college campuses and in the schools every day. So I think we have a better chance to convince the Republicans to laissez-faire the internet than we do the Democrats. But I get your point. Trump is scary on this. But I'll say this: I think Trump is no less bad than the Democrats on this issue, and he's much less bad. I think he's no more bad than the Democrats on this issue, and he's much less bad than the Democrats on the other issues, the other key issues that I mentioned.
I've got something to say on that topic. It's slightly it's fundamentally related. One of the things I left out in things that we probably agree on is the fact that the Republicans have been ratcheting towards mysticism and religion. If you start with Eisenhower and adding under God to the Pledge of Allegiance, you go to Ronald Reagan and his moral majority, you go to George Bush Sr. and his faith-based initiatives, you go to George Bush Jr. and his attacks on stem cell research. We have been getting more and more religion with Republicans, and I think that's another reason for slapping Republicans at this point in time. Now, I can't think of anything in particular that Trump has done about religion. On the other hand, he's got the evangelists in his pocket, no matter what he says or does, no matter how many women he insults in what way, Jerry Falwell Jr. will still be for him. So anyway, I wanted to point out that the connection to innovation, of course, is the stem cell research, which Trump has done and will do nothing to free up.
Yeah, by the way, in the context of how we promote objectivism, Stephanie says in the chat, maybe advocate reading Anthem. It's not scary. It's a thin book. I'm not going to read the Canadian part, but yeah, Andy mentioned social media. Anthem can probably fit into a Twitter thread, and it's in the public domain now, so we can do that. Our next question is from Lee, and I will mention at this point that our event 2 weeks from today will be a talk by Lee titled New Directions in Psychoepistemology, the Conscious Self as the Manager of Cognition and Action. Yeah, we talk about politics, but we also talk about the things that come way before. So Lee, go ahead.
Well, thanks for that, Razi. I wanted to ask the two speakers whether they want to look at history. I know Bob Daly looked at world history, but I want to look at American history and look at the history of the last 100 or 150 years. Now, I'm not a historian, but I know I'm reasonably well read. I think the history of that period basically shows a progressive, if you want to put it that way, movement towards the left. And I use the term ratchet, and I'm glad to see that Bob uses it too, because it's a good term for a lot of things in these politics. It's a ratchet. You get certain things in, and you get the income tax in, you get Social Security, and you don't get rid of it, or it's very hard to get rid of it. I'm amazed that Trump was able to get rid of the primary thing in Obamacare, which is the individual mandate that he managed to. Anyway, there's been a progression, and you can see it clearly with the regulatory state, and unfortunately now the free speech, because I agree 100% with Andy that free speech is coming under increasing attack from the left. In the old days, Ayn Rand could say that the right was attacked free speech while the left attacked free markets. It's not true anymore. The left attacks freedom everywhere. And if we lose free speech, which we are in danger of losing, we're going to end up first in 1984 and then in Anthem. And I think it will happen. It's not necessarily going to happen by a revolution. It could happen slowly because it's happening now. I could say a lot more, but I want to obey the Rossi's rules. I'll stop there. What do you guys think about the history and the progression towards leftism,
Bob,
which is attack on individual rights?
Well, I agree. The left is ratcheting towards socialism. Do recall that there have been instances under Clinton with respect to welfare programs, under Carter with respect to regulation, where they ratcheted backwards. The ratchet slipped. Now, we can't count on that. Now, of course, the Republicans have always been Me Too. They follow the ratchet. They're a little slower. They drag their heels, and they sometimes speak very firmly against ratcheting, but their actions do not act against it at all. There was another point you made. What was that?
Well, he was talking about freedom of speech.
Oh yeah, freedom of speech. Yes, of course.
Now, if you think that a president who will speak against networks, cable news, etc., who will praise particular networks, who will shut some out, well, you saw a slight example of that with Obama, but you've seen a hyper example of that with what's his name, DJ. Now, Trump also is perfectly happy to go along with conservatives and shut down our implementers of free speech these days, that is the internet. He's very happy to take those nasty big businesses. What has he said about Jeff Bezos, who's purchased the Washington Post, and what has he done about his business at Amazon? I cannot believe that you think the Republicans are better for free speech than the Democrats. They're both hideous.
Bob, I get your point, but I do believe the Republicans are less bad. I'm in the belly of the beast every day, and I know the fundamental here is not politics, it's education. And politics is way further downstream. I mean, it's the functionaries of the American educational system that are out there burning down our cities right now and who support Bernie Sanders. And that's the trend amongst the young, because the public schools, many of the private schools, the public school teachers union, the university humanity professors, they're overwhelmingly leftist. And they're not just leftist. They want to cancel any contrarian viewpoints. They want to suppress contrarian viewpoints. Now, if you succeed in doing that in the educational system, then doesn't matter if we win a few victories in politics. Politics is doomed. Freedom is doomed in this country. We're not gonna elect any we're not gonna elect anybody who supports individual rights. The battle is really in the educational system. It's in the public schools, it's in the private schools, it's in the universities, and the left wants to cancel people who support capitalism. They want to cancel the American founders. They want to preach Howard Zinn, that America's an evil, racist, slave-based nation. They're the real danger. Now, I agree with you about Trump. I can't, it's hideous where Trump stands on freedom of speech. But I'll say this: the Republicans, sometimes I hear them mention the term individual rights. Once in a while, I hear Republicans mention individual rights. I couldn't tell you the last time I heard a Democrat mention the term individual rights. The Republicans still have some people who believe in freedom. Governor Kristi Noem in South Dakota, for example, is properly a rising star in the Republican Party. There's maybe some slim shred of a basis to reach out to the Republicans on freedom of speech and freedom of intellectual expression as an individual rights issue. It is hopeless with the Democrats. They're going to impose socialism, full socialism. Bernie Sanders is going to push us to full socialism, and they're going to cancel and fire anybody from the schools and the universities who oppose them. And I'm telling you, this is obviously the direction of the Democratic Party. Comrade Bernie may not be the Democratic nominee in 24 simply because of age, but one of his offshoots and clones, whether it's Ocasio-Cortez or somebody like that, is going to be the Democratic candidates in 24 and 28 and 32, and they're going to push us into full socialism, including the insanity of the Green New Deal. Now, I think Trump and the Republicans, and you're right about the Democratic mayors. I don't think voting for Trump is going to remediate that, but we need to vote straight Republican. They're the only chance. They're the least bad of the two parties. I agree with you; they're horrible, but the Democrats are worse. They're not even Marxists anymore. Like I said, they're post-Marxist nihilists. They move beyond Marxism, and they're overtly for destruction of America at this point. They're repulsively evil, and they have to be stopped and opposed wherever we can, especially in the universities and in the school system.
Well, I don't know if we're gonna delve into this too much, but Nikos says they were never Marxist, Andy, and you and Nikos have this disagreement because Nikos is a former Marxist. He knows what he's talking about.
Well, maybe Nikos is right. Maybe they never were. Maybe it was always about nihilism. Maybe it was always about envy-driven destruction of the best people in the capitalist society. Nikos may be right about that.
Betsy, next question is from you.
Okay. 2 points. In terms of social media, the Republicans are much better. For instance, under Obama, they instituted net neutrality, which is government takeover of the internet. And under Trump, he dismantled it. Kamala Harris wants to bring it back. 1 point. In terms of dealing with dictators, Biden was all for the treaty with Iran and giving them money and removing sanctions, and Trump canceled the agreement, put sanctions back in. And right now, Iran is one of the biggest threats to the United States. He also dismantled ISIS, which has already been mentioned. And generally, in terms of everything I value, from free speech and freedom and security and so forth, the Democrats are nihilists, and that's what they're for. Americans, at least, being pro-American is a good thing. The Democrats are against America. They hate America. Some Republicans are for individual rights. No Democrats are. Just in general, there's nothing of value that I see in the Democrats, and some potential value in some Republicans. That's the bottom line.
Andy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something because I agree with Bob, on a lot about the Republicans. I was talking about the devolution of the Democratic Party from the Trumans, Kennedys, and Scoop Jacksons and Moynahans who loved America and would defend America, to the Democratic Party today of anti-capitalist, anti-American socialists who hate America and want to destroy it. Well, the Republicans have devolved also, and I don't think, but not as egregiously. And since I grew up in New York City and Brooklyn, and I'm living in the New York suburbs now. This will make a contrast here between New York City when Giuliani was mayor, just like 25 years ago, and New York City today under the communist de Blasio. Giuliani believed in strong policing, brought the crime rates way down. New York City was one of the safest cities in the country for years, during and after Giuliani. De Blasio is a communist. He wants to defund the. Well, he's a real leftist. He wants to defund the police, not suppress rioters. The crime rate and the homicide rate in New York City has gone way up. Now, do the Republicans have a Giuliani today? Because Bob's right. Just voting for Trump's not going to remediate the crime in our cities under Democratic mayors and city councils. But I don't know that there's any Republicans like Giuliani today, who are running for office. The Republicans aren't what they were 25 or 30 years ago. But I'll just say this. If there's any hope to bring civilized behavior into our cities, suppress riots, bring down the homicide rate, and protect the lives of innocent people, it's not going to come from the Democrats. Our only hope for civilized urban behavior is from the Republicans. And this is why I'm glad to see a number of Black Americans are starting to wake up what the Democrats have done to the cities and to the Black neighborhoods. And the Kim Klacik in Baltimore is really out. She's running for Black woman Republican, running for Congress in Baltimore. She is outspoken on what the Democrats have done to Baltimore and the Black neighborhoods in urban centers around the country. And I think Black Americans are starting to wake up. I saw a poll amongst Black Americans who said 81% said they wanted at least as much policing as they have now or more. Only 19% wanted less policing. Giuliani's policies brought the crime rate and homicide rate in New York City way down, including in Black neighborhoods. There were far fewer killings. The Republican Party is not what it used to be. There may not be any Giuliani's running for mayors, but they're the only hope to restore civilized behavior and bring down the crime rate, the rates of violent crime and homicide rates in our urban centers. The Democrats, they're showing who they are. They're nihilists. This is what they want. Look, if you let a riot go on for one night, you're wrong. If you let it go on for 3 months, it's very clear this is what you want. You want destruction. That's what the Democrats are. That's why we have to oppose them.
Oh, I'm in favor of all this destruction, man. So, no, I don't think that most people who are Democrats, in fact, are that way. I agree that essentially the Democratic Party has become that way. But at this point in time, I don't think that a vote for a Democratic Republican means a vote for nihilism, a vote for crime in the streets. I don't believe that's what it means. Whereas I do think that a vote for Trump does mean authoritarianism ain't so bad. Andy, when you were talking about you didn't know of any Democrat who mentioned individual rights, evidently you did not read Kamala Harris's acceptance speech or hear it.
No, I did not.
Lines right out of the Declaration. Whereas, of course, Trump had no lines out of the Declaration.
All right, well, I stand corrected, Bob. Thank you. Kamala Harris mentioned the term individual rights, so I was wrong about that. But Kamala Harris is a hardcore leftist who votes like 92% of the time, I read, with Bernie Sanders. So, I mean, we could say for sure that anything she mentions about individual rights is lip service, whereas I think the Republicans, at least in some cases, do favor individual rights in some cases, at least in the economic sphere, including to this day. And I think that they're less bad on the key right here, and that is freedom of speech and the suppression of
So
freedom of speech.
I would suggest, yeah, go ahead and vote for Republicans, except not for president.
You know, I had this discussion with Yaron on his show a couple of months ago. I understand that argument. Yaron was saying the country's very often best off with a Democratic president and a Republican-controlled Congress. There may be some truth in that, except, you know, Joe Biden is, poor guy, is an empty vessel. Much as I hate the Democratic Party and Biden, I don't like to see my dad died of Alzheimer's. My sisters and I know what that's like. It's horrible. I don't wish it on anybody but Nazis, communists, you know, and jihadists, you know, mass murderers. But Joe Biden is sadly losing his faculties, and he's going to be controlled by the Democratic Party, which is hardcore left. Kamala Harris is votes with Bernie Sanders. She supports the Green New Deal. She wants to defund the police. This is who's going to control the White House, and I think it's worse in this case having these guys in the presidency than having Trump.
Yeah, you've gone too far. You've painted Kamala with a lot of things that she is not responsible for, and it's really easy to say, I guess I'd rather have Pence than Harris. Yeah, I don't know. Would you really?
Well, you're right about religion. The Republicans have become taken over by religion in the last, you know, since the 1970s, as Reagan was rising to power in the party, although Trump is not particularly religious, but the Republican Party is, and they, you know, and religion is a danger, not just on abortion rights, but they're a danger to freedom of speech. You know, if people, you know, what was that line, that freedom of religion doesn't mean freedom from religion? So yeah, they're dangerous, but you know, the religionists have some element of Americanism in them. They tend to really appreciate some things, great things about the United States. The Democratic Party is not American anymore. They're German. Let me repeat that. The Democrats are not American anymore. They're German. They're controlled by Kant, Hegel, and Marx. That's their philosophy. Their philosophy of social dominance over the individual. They're dominated by Germanic political philosophy, where the religious conservatives are a combination of medieval religion and some element of 18th century Americanism. And that element of Americanism is still there in the Republicans. It's gone in the Democratic Party, Bob. It's just gone. They're not Americans anymore. That's why I opposed Obama. You know, people say, "What, you don't like Obama because he's black?" I said, "No, I don't like Obama because he's red." Now, he wasn't literally a communist, but he was a Marxist. And he was moving in that direction. And the whole Democratic Party is taken over by German philosophy.
Andy, who controls the Republicans?
Well, like I said, philosophically, I think they're a clinically fascinating, eclectic mixture, Bob. They're like partly Christian, they're partly 18th century American, and like you said, they're partly Me Too socialists, which means they're partly German philosophy. They're a mongrel mix, but there's still that element of Americanism there that's completely absent in the Democrats. They're all Marxists, they're all leftists, they're all socialists. They're not Americans anymore.
Guys, sorry to interject. I know this is a topic we can probably talk about for a few hours, but Andy is on his way. Andy, I hope you can stay with us while you're walking to class, but he is on his way to teach the next generation. So hopefully a few decades from now, we can have a debate on who we should vote for rather than against.
Yeah, but I can't say this stuff in class, Rossi.
So can we very quickly take Jay and Stephanie's comments and then see if we have time for responses from both speakers.
Thanks, Andy and Bob. Enjoyed the discussion. For me, as I wrote in the chat, there's one bottom line to all this: is who's going to control the veto and the executive order power of the executive branch of government. And considering all the trade-offs of all these issues, that's the bottom line for getting to the essential at this moment.
Stephanie.
I thank you both for this. Andy, you really gave me a lot more ammunition Sorry, Bob. I'm even more now with Andy than ever before. I was already there myself. I really think that we got to be working towards Republican, who's next after Trump, and working on candidates who you think is a good idea to help them, approach them with objectivism. I like Trey Gowdy. There's these other people have mentioned. See if they can be reached. The Democrats are religious in their own way, and it's worse than mystical religion because it's ecology. It's the untouched planet, and we all have to sacrifice for that. And that's the end of our free speech. That's the end of our electrical lifestyle. If they get in, you know, they may not mean it, but that's what they will achieve. And that's what I'm scared of. I don't want to die and living in a freezing cold, whatever. So I think that we have to be looking ahead to cultivating better Republican candidates. There have been some people coming up, and that's the hope for us, is to make sure that we stay Republican, not just Trump, but the 4 years, the 8 years after that as well, until something happens to those other people that they just kind of disappear, right? Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Let's quickly get Andy's comment because he needs to leave very soon. And then after Bob has his closing remarks, we will try again the Zoom poll functionality to see who objectivists are voting against or for. Andy.
Well, you can see I'm all masked up now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, let me pull down the mask and make sure nobody on the mask police sees me. I agree with Stephanie. The environmentalists are a form of religion, much worse than Christianity. And the Green New Deal, notice that the religious right isn't pushing the Green New Deal. It's the leftists. And they will destroy the economy for no reason, as I said. As far as candidates, I'd like to see Nikki Haley and Kristi Noem as the Republican ticket in 2024. Two women candidates, not because they're women, I'm not a leftist, but because I don't care about their gender, but because they tend to be supporters of individual rights and political economic liberties, much more so than most other Republicans, never mind the Democrats. Let me thank you, Rozzy, Bob, everybody. Thanks for doing this. This was interesting, and I got to go teach those bright, eager young minds. So have a good day, everybody. Take
Thanks,
care.
Andy. See you soon.
Bye.
Bob.
See you, Andy.
I got a question for Stephanie, and that is, are you more likely to get a better Republican candidate if Biden wins or if Trump wins in the next time?
I think that with the arguments that we have here, that we've heard today from Andy and that we've been coming up with, that with Trump winning, we do, because we still have the same arguments that we have to continue to move forward, to keep them out and to actually change and get things changing in the educational system so that the kids are really receiving a real education. Because right now they're having their minds destroyed. They can't think, they can't read, they can't speak, they have absolutely no idea which way's up. That is just got to change. And so it doesn't matter. They're the same. They're the same kind of candidate in many respects because they're both authoritarian and they're both kind of idiotic and they both make stupid comments in different ways. So in so many respects, Trump and Biden are equivalent. What's different is who's around them, who's in their camp, who's feeding ideas into them. Trump gathers people who offer some different ideas, and he does get some better people. Everybody around Biden is bleeding us off the cliff. There's nobody sensible that I've seen on that party. So it doesn't, you see, in one sense, it matters because we will still have energy. We will still have the economy. We still have a chance to be alive and communicating with the social distancing, which we won't have with the Green New Dealers implementing their plans, which they are adamant about doing. And Bob, it's not Biden. Doesn't matter what he says because he's not the one who's running the thing.
Thanks, Stephanie. Bob, closing remarks, and then we will say goodbye to our Facebook audience. But I'll keep the Zoom call open. Bob.
Well, I disagree that Biden is authoritarian. So now, with respect to closing remarks, I still think the major danger is authoritarianism, and I think that Trump is more representative of that than Biden by several orders of magnitude. with respect to the Democrats getting their platform through, no party has ever gotten its platform through. With respect to the man in the street, the Democrat in the street, I do not believe that they're in favor of the green program. I think you are totally overestimating the possibility of any of those stupid socialist plans coming to fruition with Biden in power. On the other hand, 4 years from now, after Biden, if Biden wins, he's going to be saddled with almost runaway inflation, given what Trump has done with the budget, with total economic collapse, given what he has done with fair trade, free trade. I think that whoever wins this next election is going to be really scooted out next time. And he's going to leave with all kinds of bad tastes in everybody's mouth. So I totally disagree with Stephanie about what will happen in the election after this. But again, my greatest fear is in the long run that what Trump is doing and what I'm afraid he will do if he has 4 more years of power is to destroy more and more bits of our constitutional system. And I think that is the thing that will protect us. Our constitutional system is what will protect us from continuing to be able to spread objectivism. Andy brought up education, and unfortunately we don't have time to talk a lot about that. But if you ask what Trump has done for that and what he might do in the next 4 years, answer that for yourself.
Thank you, Bob, and I'll thank Andy again. I think this was an interesting event that, again, I think could have gone on for a few more hours, and everybody would still have more to say, but unfortunately, we are out of time. We'll be back next Monday. I don't know what that will be yet, but you can follow us on all our social media, and we will post it. And to be on these Zoom calls, join the London Ayn Rand Meetup. And if you haven't had enough of the U.S. election, tomorrow on our weekday Facebook Live show, The Daily Objective, as every Tuesday, we will be discussing the U.S. election. So there's more of that. And in the poll that we did, Donald Trump got 66%, Biden got 14%, and none of the above 26%. I will refrain from commenting on that. And I will thank everybody watching on Facebook. And I hope you join us again soon.